Chapter 6 of History. Now, history is a narration of actions, either with praise or dispraise, which declares and sets forth the conduct and event of great things, the actions of kings and illustrious men, according to the order of time and place. Therefore, most men think this to be the mistress of well living, and most useful for the instruction thereof, for that by the examples of great things it both incites the best of men, out of a desire of immortal glory, to undertake great and noble actions, and also for fear of perpetual infamy. It deters wicked men from vice, but it often falls out contrary, and many, as Livy relates of Manlium Capitolinum, had rather purchase great than good fame, and when they cannot obtain their desired greatness by virtuous means, will endeavor to achieve it by acts of impiety, as Justin out of Trogus relates of Pausanias the young Macedonian, famous for the murder of King Philip, and is also justified of Herostratus, who burnt the temple of Diana, the most famous structure in the world, which had been 200 years in building, at the expense of all Asia, as Gellius, Valkyrius, and Solinus report. And although it was acted under most severe penalties, that no man should so much as make mention of his name, either by word or writing, yet he attained the end which spurred him on to create so great a villainy, his name being still remembered, and yet living to this our present age. But let us return to history, which being a thing above all things promises order, fidelity, coherence, and truth, is yet defective in every one. For historians are at such variance amongst themselves, delivering several tales of one and the same story, that it is impossible but that most of them must be the greatest liars in the world. For to omit the beginning of the world, the universal deluge, the building of Rome, or of any other great city from whence they generally commence the first beginnings of all their huge narratives, of which they are altogether ignorant, of the other generally very incredulous, and of the third very uncertain what to determine. For these things, being the most remote in time, more easily gain pardon for vulgar error. But as to what concerns later times and ages, within the memory of our ancestors, there is no excuse that can be admitted for their lying. Now the causes why they so much differ among themselves are many. For the most of historians, because they were not living at the same time, or were not present at the actions, or conversant with the persons, taking their relations upon trust at the second hand, miss the chief scope of truth and certainty, of which Vice, Eratosthenes, Metrodorus, Septimus, Posidonius, and Patroclus the geographer are accused by Strabo. Others there are who having seen by halves as in a march, or as mendicant travelers to perform vows, viewing many provinces, undertake to compile histories, such as formerly Onesicritus and the Aristobulus set forth concerning India. Some others, to please their own fancies, will feign upon true history, and sometimes for the fables fake omit the whole truth, as Diodorus Siculus notes of Herodotus Liberianus, and Vopiscus of Trebellius, Tertullian and Oriphus of Tacitus, among which you may likewise reckon Denides and Philostratus. Others convert the whole story into fables, as Guidius, Ctesias, Hecatius, and many of the ancient historiographers. Others there are who, impudently arrogating to themselves the name and title of historians, lest they should seem to be ignorant of anything, or to have borrowed from others, presume to write strange and wonderful relations of unknown places and inaccessible provinces, of which nature are those figments of the Arimaspi, griffins, pygmies, cranes, people with dogs' heads, the Astromeri, people with horses' feet, the Phanisci, and the Troglodytes, akin to which are those relations that aver the northern seas to be frozen all over. However, they find fools, and men without wit or judgment who believe these things, and take them for oracles. In the number of these idle writers is Ephorus to be reckoned, who related that there was but one city in Ireland, as also Stephen the Grecian, who said the Franks were a people of Italy, and that Vienna was a city of Galilee, together with Arianus that affirmed the Germans to be borderers upon Ionia, and Dionysius, so notorious for his tales of the Pyrenean hills. For further confirmation, we find that what Tacitus, Marcellus, Orosius, and Blondus discourse concerning many places of Germany is for the most part very unagreeable to truth. Falsely doth Strabo affirm that Ister, which is the Donau, rises not far from the Adriatic Sea. Falsely doth Herodotus affirm the same river to flow from the west, that it rises among the Celti, the farthest people of all Europe, and disgorges itself among the Scythians. Again, falsely doth Strabo relate that the rivers Lapis and Visurgis flow as far as Hanasus, when as Lapis falls into the Rhine and Visurgis into the sea. So Pliny relates that the river Mosa hastens into the ocean, whereas it runs not into the ocean but into the Rhine. Errors like these we find among historians and geographers of a later date. Sabellicus makes the Alani to be descended from the Alemanni, and the Hungarians from the Huns. Moreover, he asserts the Goths and Getars to be the Scythians, and confounds the Danes with the Dacians, and fixes the mountain of Deotilius in Bavaria, which was not far from Argentoratum. Volitarinus also will have Austrania and Austria, the Avarian, Savari, Lucerna, and Nolium to be the same. And fate that Pliny makes mention of the Switzers, of the canton of Bern, when it is known they were placed there long after by Bartholdus, Duke of Thuringi. In like manner, Conradus Celtes believes the Dacians and Cimbrians to be the same, and he places the Riphean mountains in Samaria. Fang, besides that, the gum amber distills out of a tree. There are yet other historians guilty of greater lies than this, and deceiving double blame, who, though they were present at the transactions themselves, or otherwise knowing the carriage and management of things, yet overcome by favor and affection, and flattery of their own party, against the faith of history will confirm falsity for truth, and deliver to posterity a wrong account of things. Of these there are some who, undertaking to write histories in excuse or justification of some particular men's actions, and relating only such things as conduce to make good their argument, while they either dissemble, pass by, or extenuate the rest, make imperfect and corrupt histories, of which fault Blondus taxes Orifice, for that he omits that famous overthrow in Italy, which made the Goths masters of Ravenna, Aquilegia, Ferrara, and almost all Italy, lest he should injure the argument which he had propounded to himself. Others there are who out of fear, envy, or hatred detract from the truth. Others, while they greedily desire to extol their own acts, vilify the deeds of others, so to bring them into contempt, writing not what the thing is, but what they desire it should have been, not doubting they shall ever want those that will not only confirm but patronize their untruths. This vice was very familiar among the ancient Greek authors, and at this time many of your annalists and chronographers are guilty of the same, as Sabellicus and Blondus in their Venetian stories, Paulus Aemilius and Gauganus in the relations of the Franks, men whom, as Plutarch saith, princes cherish for no other reason than they by their smart wits suffocating and concealing the merits of others may be only free to advance their actions, magnified by the addition of fables, countenanced by the majesty of history. Thus the Greek historians, writing of the inventors of things, assume and arrogate all things to their own countrymen. There is another crew, the most abominable of all, which are flatterers, who, endeavoring to deduce the pedigree of their princes from the most ancient kings, when they cannot compass their ends in the right line, extravagate into foreign pedigrees and fables, feigning the names both of kings and places, not omitting any fraud that may help out their purpose. Of this sort is that barbarian Hunibaldus, who, writing the history of the Franks, has feigned the names of Scythia, Sicambria, and Priamus the Younger, which never any historian did before, or ever followed him in doing after, unless those that were like himself, as Gregorius Turonensis, Regino, and Sigisbert, and some few others. Of the famed chaff is Vituscindus, who will have the Saxons, the most ancient people of Germany, to be descended from the Macedonians, especially the race of Alexander, whom the greatest part of the West pursue in the same error. Many write historics not so much for truth's sake as to delight the reader, and to set forth some idea of a king which they have framed to themselves, whom if any one convince of falsehood, they cry, they did not aim at the truth of transaction so much as the profit of posterity, and propagating the fame of their own ingenuity. Therefore, they do not relate how things were done, but how they ought to have been done, it not being their business obstinately to defend the truth, but to feign and falsify where it seems practicable, calling Fabius to witness that a lie is not to be dispraised which persuades to honesty, and furthermore affirming that when they write to posterity, it matters not under whose name, or in what order of time the example of a good prince to be exposed to public view. Thus Xenophon wrote the story of Cyrus, not as he was, but what he ought to have been, propounding him as a true pattern, an example of a just and heroic prince. Hence it comes to pass that many apt to feign by nature, and using industry therewithal, have applied themselves to write those romances of Morgant and Morgolona, Amadis, Florin, Tyron, Connemore, Arthur, Lancelot, Tristram, generally unlearned, and worse than the mad dreams of poets, and more fabulous than comedies and fables themselves. Among the learned, Lucian and Apuleius obtain the first degree. Part also of the history of Herodotus is not to be left out, which Cicero denies not to be very full of lies and ridiculous fables. For there we read of the Medes drinking up the whole rivers at a dinner, and how people failed over the mountain Athos. And whatsoever else the lying Greek in storied airs, ... And these are the reasons that there is no exact truth to be found in history, though it be the thing we most seek for there. Seeing then there are no writings of public transactions that are able to declare the real truth and convince error, but that every man is left to his own opinion. Hence it happens that there is so much discord among historians, and so much that they write sometimes quite contrary of the same things. In how many places, saith Josephus, doth Hellenicus differ from Agesilaus in point of genealogy? In how many places doth Agesilaus correct Herodotus? How doth Ephorus show Hellenicus to be false in most things? How doth Timaeus rebuke Ephorus? And others coming afterward, how do they find fault with Timaeus? But everyone blames Herodotus. In many things Thucydides is accused to be fallacious, though he seemed to have written very tenderly and with much care. This Josephus writes of others, whom notwithstanding our Agesippus very severely corrects. Furthermore, many from the relations of historiographers relate many things, but not upon proof, and those that go about to prove things that are not to be justified generally propound the worst examples for imitation, for they who so much extol and raise such lofty pyramids to the praises of Hercules, Achilles, Hector, Theseus, Epaminondas, Lysander, Themistocles, Xerxes, Cyrus, Darius, Alexander, Pyrrhus, Hannibal, Scipio, Pompey, and Caesar? What have they done but describe the greatest and most furious thieves and robbers in the world? Say they were great generals, yet were they the worst and wickedest of men. If anyone shall say to me that there is much wisdom to be gained by the reading of history, I will grant it. So he allowed that there is also more impiety to be learned, and indeed, as marshal upon another occasion faith, there are some good things made indifferent, but an infinite of evil. Chapter 6 of Rhetoric. Now, rhetoric, which is the next, whether it be an art or no, is mainly disputed amongst the most learned men, and remains to this day a question undetermined. For Socrates in Plato by most found reasons argues it to be neither an art nor a science, but a certain kind of subtlety, and that neither noble nor honest, but mere low, illiberal, and servile flattery. Lysias, Menedimus, and Cleanthes were of opinion that eloquence could not be comprehended within the bounds of any art, but that it proceeds from nature, which is the common school mistress of mankind, and as occasion serves, teaches everyone to sooth, to relate pleasant stories, and to use arguments. And as for memory, right pronunciation, and invention, they are merely natural effects, which is indeed not a little evident in Antonius, the prince of the Latin orators. And although before Theseus, Chorocles, and Gorgias, there was not anyone who had either taught or wrote of rhetoric, yet were there many men who through the strength of their natural parts became to be very eloquent. Furthermore, Seeing that art is defined to be a collection of precepts, is it a great dispute among the rhetoricians what the end should be? Whether to persuade or to teach good utterance, and not content with the true grounds, they daily seek to invent new and fictitious, to which end they have found out so many theses, hypotheses, figures, colors, characters, suasory phrases, controversies, declamations, proems, insinuations, courtships, and artificial stories, that it is impossible to recount them all. And yet, they deny that among all these the end of rhetoric is to be found. This made the Lacedaemonians altogether refute it, believing that the speech of good men ought to proceed from the sincerity of the heart, not from the hypocrisy of studied artifice. The ancient Romans would not admit rhetoricians into their city in a long while, and when Cicero had after much labor endeavored to show that the faculty of making orations did not proceed from art but from wisdom, as he aspires to prove in his book De Oratore, yet it is not the rhetorician whom he there proposes for the only true pattern of an orator so well approved of. Nay, to Brutus, a man of singular integrity, no way pleasing. And always this opinion hath borne sway, that the precepts of oratory are more hurtful than useful to the life of man. And to say truth, it is evident that the whole discipline of rhetoric is nothing else but an artificial help, or the mystery of flattery, or as some more boldly affirm, lying, whereby they endeavor, what they cannot gain by truth, to effect by the flourishing varnishes of fine language, as Archidamus, the sophist, said of Pericles by the report of Eunapius, which Archidamus being demanded which was the more powerful, Pericles or himself made answer, if Pericles were over, come by me in war. Yet such is his eloquence of speech, that should he be but discourse thereof, he would rather appear a victor than a person vanquished. And of Carneades plenty reports, that while he disputed, it was hard to discern what was true and what was not. Of whom it is likewise related that when he had one day spoken many things wisely and elegantly in the behalf of justice, the next day with the fame, learning, and eloquence declaimed in her dispraise. There was Corax, a rhetorician among the Syracusans, a man of an acute wit and promptness of speech, who taught this art for gain. To him Titius came, and not having ready money, promised him double pay so soon as he should have taught him his art, which condition Corax willingly accepted, and taught him. Titius, having afterwards learnt his art, and intending to defraud Corax of his reward, demanded of him, what is rhetoric? Who answering, that it was effectual persuasion. Then said Titius, whatever argument has been made between us, if I can persuade myself that I owe them nothing, then shall I be quit of my debt. If I can not persuade myself, notwithstanding, I shall then owe thee nothing either, because thou hast pretended to teach me how to persuade. To which Corax replied, whatever said he, I agreed to take of thee if I can persuade myself to take it. I ought so to do because I have so persuaded myself. If I cannot persuade myself, however, I ought to take my reward for having bred a scholar that so far excels his master. When the Syracusans heard 'em thus contending and wrangling together, They cried out, "Bad crows lay bad eggs," meaning that bad masters make worse scholars. A story not unlike this, Gellius reports of Protagoras, the sophist, and Evathalus, his disciple. Now, as it is many times commendable, delightful, and always profitable to know how for a man to express himself in neat, exact, discreet, and fluent language, so sometimes it falls out to be a thing very much to be discommended, many times of ill consequence, and always very much to be suspected. Wherefore Socrates thinks rhetoricians worthy of no respect, and will not allow them any power in a well-ordered commonwealth. And Plato excludes them out of his commonwealth with the same contempt as he rejects players and poets, not without reason. For there is nothing more dangerous in civil affairs than this deluding mystery, as that from whence all prevaricators, juggling, shufflers, backbiters, sycophants, and all other lewd and vile-tongued persons derive their malice and knavery. With this art, many persons endued raise seditions and commotions in nations, while by their nimble tongues some are deceived, some flattered, some over-persuaded, usurping as it were a kind of tyranny over men, not so subtle as themselves. Therefore, saith Euripides, is it tyrannical to boast of knowledge? And Aeschylus writes, that composed orations are the greatest evils in the world. And Raphael Voltarenus, a most studious lover of histories and examples, confesses that upon due consideration of all that he had read or seen, either of ancient or modern stories and examples, he finds very few eloquent men to have been good men. Hath not this thing called eloquence not only greatly disturbed most potent commonwealths, but also wholly ruined them? Witness the examples of Brutus, Crassus, Gracchus, Cato, Cicero, Demosthenes, who as they were accounted the most eloquent, so were they the most seditious and turbulent of their time. For censorious Cato, being himself 40 times accused, 70 times accused others, being nothing but a continual disturber of the peace, with his mad declamations all his life long. The other Cato, called Vicentus, by provoking Caesar, was a great occasion of the utter subversion of the Roman liberty. In like manner did Cicero provoke Antony to the great mischief of the empire, and Demosthenes incensed Philip to the ruin of the Athenians, so that there is no state of government but has been highly injured by this wicked art. No society of men that ever lent their ears to the charms of eloquence that has not been extremely mischieved thereby. Moreover, a confident eloquence prevails much in judicature. Eloquence being the patroness, bad cases are defended, the guilty are saved from the punishment of the law, and the innocent are condemned. Marcus Cato, the most prudent among the Romans, forbade those 3 Athenian orators, Carneades, Critolaus, and Diogenes, to be admitted to public audience in the city, being men endued with such acuteness of wit and eloquence of speech that they could with great ease make evil good and good evil. And Demosthenes was wont to boast among his friends that he could sway the opinions of the judges by virtue of his eloquence, which way soever he pleased, and that according to his will and pleasure, Philip and the Athenians either made war or peace. Such is the force of eloquence, either to allay or incite the affections of men, having as it were supreme dominion over nations, to make them follow her persuasions. For this reason, Cicero was at Rome called king, because he ruled and guided the Senate by his orations, which way he pleased. Hence it appears that rhetoric is nothing else but the art of moving and stirring the affections by subtle language, exquisite varnishing of neat phrase and cunning insinuation, ravishing the minds of heedless people, leading them into the captivity of error, and subverting the sense and meaning of truth. So that if by the benefit of nature there is nothing but may be expressed in proper language, what can be more pestilent than the focus and varnishes of fallacious words? The language of truth is simple, but quick and penetrating, a discerner of the intentions of the heart, and like a sword easily cuts in sunder the difficult enthymemes and Gordian knots of rhetoric. This made Demosthenes, though he contemned all other fine and eloquent speakers of his time, nevertheless to stand in awe of one Phocion, who also spoke pithily, short, plainly, and to the purpose, and was therefore wont to call him the hatchet of his orations. Perchance the ancient Romans were not ignorant of these things, who, as Suetonius witnesses, twice expelled rhetoricians by public edict out of the city, once when Faunius Strabo and Valerius Messala were consuls, and the second time in the consulships of the Domitius Enobarbarus and Licinius Crassus, and a third time in the reign of Domitian the emperor by a unanimous decree of Senate. They were not only expelled out of Rome, but also out of all Italy. The Athenians forbade them to come near the seat of judicature, as being perverters of justices. They also put to death Timagoras for flattering Darius, according to the custom of the Persians, in too high and obsequious a matter. The Lacedaemonians exiled Ctesiphon only because he bragged that he could talk a whole day upon any subject. For there was nothing which they hated more than this curious artifice of the tongue, appertaining to men that nothing regarded the speaking of truth but whatever work they proposed themselves, that to polish with high-flown and big words, and only intending to deceive the minds of their auditors, and to boast of their leading them by the noses. And now it is evident that never any man were made better by this art, but many worse, who, though they sometimes speak handsomely of virtue and honest things, yet are far more polite, elegant, and ingenious in the defense of error, to sow sedition, to stir up factions, to heap slanders and reproaches and calumnies, than in the reconciling of differences, making peace, maintaining amity, or in the commendation of love, faith, or religion. Moreover, many men, presuming too far upon this art, have revolted from the orthodox faith. From this art flow those numberless sects, heresies, and superstitions that contaminate religion, while some so condemn the Scripture because it abounds not in Ciceronian phrases, that many times they take part with the quaint and fallacious arguments of the heathen against the Catholic truth, which is manifest from the Tatian heretics and from those whom Libanius the sophist and Symmachus the orator, great champions of idolatry, together with Celsus Africanus and Julian the apostate, seduced from the true religion, insulting over Christianity with their flashes of rhetoric. from whose pernicious and blasphemous oratory heretics have drawn many persuasive arguments to seduce simple people from the true faith. And do we not nowadays see the most eminent and learned, most elegant and subtle doctors and disputants in the world to be the greatest heads of heresies and factions? So are men affected with the charms of eloquence, that rather than not be Ciceronians, they will turn pagans, these becoming impious, while those that are more zealously devoted to Aristotle and Plato become altogether superstitious. But all these vain babblers that so fill the ears of their auditors with their empty and idle orations shall one day stand before the great tribunal to give an account of those errors which they have so vainly feigned and invented against the truth of God. Thank you for letting me read to you. Please check the description for where to buy my art and my channel page for where to send me a one-time donation. Please watch my movie, Salome's Last Prance. It is an audio-visual production of Oscar Wilde's band play Salome based on the Bible story with a twist. And I will see you tomorrow.